Hello, hello, hello. Listen, podcasting is no joke, right? All of the endless to-do lists, it can just make you want to quit. No joke. And if you're doing it all by yourself, forget about it. It's astounding when you're trying to do all these things all by yourself. But my goodness, we have a solution to your problem. Because today you get a chance to stick around with us for an hour or so because we are going to take you from overwhelmed to in control. Are you with me? All right. So you'll know how to record, how to optimize, how to publish your podcast episode like a pro without a team and all by yourself. And we'll give you a couple of other little fun things there to get you moving forward. So all that to say, are you not thrilled to be hanging out with us? But before we get started, hi, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Elsie Escobar. I'm the Director of Community and Content for Libsyn, and I am here just to make sure that you are taken care of and do a little bit of housekeeping before I introduce all of us fancy people that are going to be helping you do your thing. Now, that said, if you would like to get started hosting with Libsyn, you can get Libsyn for 30 days for free by using the code LEARNLIVE. And you'll find a link not only in our description, but in the chat. And speaking of the chat, I'm going to take care of some housekeeping for us right now. If you have any questions that come up during this entire event, go ahead and write Q and colon and ask your question. It just helps our team in the back be able to sift through your questions and make sure that we address them and all of that fun stuff. And of course, make sure that you keep an eye on the chat there because there are some communications happening in there. And I'm going to shout out before we start with our panelist. I'm going to shout out Corey, who is in the chat. She's going to be engaging with you there. She's posting as the Libsyn channel. So say hi to Corey first there. Touch base with her. She'll take care of you. And on that note, please come on stage, Brian, our amazing video editor, and Emilio from our support team who are joining me today to do this whole thing step by step, right? Are we not so excited?
This is going to be fun. This is going to
be
fun.
A good time.
You know, a lot of people don't know this, but we plan out these lives a little bit in advance. And Elsie, we were trying to come up with what our last live of the year was going to be. And when you said solo podcasting, from soup to nuts, I'm like, okay, there's so much that I think overwhelms podcasters who are doing this all on their own. And so I am really excited to go through some things that I really think are going to save them time and their sanity, because that's important.
Yeah. And we're so glad to have Emilio here. Emilio, welcome to our saying hello to all the people.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here, and I'm looking forward to this as well.
Right on. All right. So we have so much to cover, y'all. We have a ton of information. We're going to do our very best to stay on time. We probably will go over just a little bit because there is so much information happening, but we are going to break it down just to let you know. We're going to start in the same way that you would put an episode together with your content recording side of things and audio stuff. We're going to go into some of the metadata stuff, show note things you have to do in order to publish. And then we're going to walk you through the whole entire publishing process and out. So this should be great. We hope that we'll save you time by the end of that. Now, Brian, why don't you go ahead and take care of the beginning portion of this, the recording of your episode.
Awesome. So I'm going to throw it to a slide here. I know no slides are fun, but we're going to do a little bit of slides and then a little bit of diving inside of editing, which is fun. So let's talk about just recording. Recording is one of the most important things that you really have to get down when you are going to then move to editing. Because I really believe that garbage in, garbage out is a very true thing. Okay? If your recording is not that great, then there really isn't a ton of processes that you can do in post that is going to save that. Okay, so first, my biggest tip, if you haven't done so already, get yourself a dynamic mic, okay? Microphone I have right here, which is the Rode Pod mic, the OG, the original one. This is a great mic, okay? It's great because it is going to save you from doing a lot of work in removing background noise. Background noise sucks. It's terrible. No one likes to deal with it. And it honestly is a sign of a low quality recording, okay? So use something like a dynamic mic like this. Don't spend the money on a condenser. Condensers, yes, they're going to make your voice sound great, but that really is only great in a properly treated studio. And majority of us podcasters, we don't have that. So tip number 1, get a dynamic mic. The things I'm going to be going over lead to me tip number 2. I'm going to be using Adobe Audition because that's what I like to edit in. But here's the thing. Everything that I'm going to be talking about, the processes, work across any DAW that you use. Okay, if you're using Audacity, you can find these processes. If you're using Hindenburg, you can find these processes. If you're using Reaper or any other DAW, these things can be used. Okay, and I did that specifically because I don't want someone to be like, "Well, you're using Audition." You can do this in any of them. They just might be named differently. And honestly, if you're using something like Descript or if you're using Riverside and you're using their editor, I guarantee you that they're doing similar processes as well to your audio, okay? Now, tip number 2, aside from use a good microphone, is make sure you're recording ISO tracks at high quality, okay? So isolated tracks are going to save you when you're editing, okay? If you're recording in person, use something like a multi-track recorder like I used to when I was recording in person for my show, used a Tascam DR70D, okay? But a Zoom PodTrack P4 is great for this sort of thing. If you're recording using remote recording tools, more often than not, they have ISO tracks built in. And in fact, the example that we're going to be using today has been done with Riverside. So those isolated tracks are there. It's just going to save you in editing process. Now, a note about remote recording. This is something that I think is not talked about enough. You know, there are a ton of different tools out there that do a lot of the same sort of thing. But if you're podcasting solo, and this is worth a solo shot right there. If you are podcasting solo and you're looking at different tools, one key thing I would ask yourself when evaluating, the different tools that you want to use and what you want to pay for, right? Are there extra things in that tool, that remote recording tool, that can save you time? What do I mean by that? Well, right now we are recording this live stream. We're doing this live stream using Ecamm Live. Okay, I'm going to call them out because they're great. I love Ecamm. They just released a new feature that allows integration with Opus Clip. Okay, so if you are looking at recording your podcast and you want to then create social clips, well, that makes it right there. That is right there. You can pump out those social clips right from the get-go. If you're using Riverside, they have similar features, right? You can easily take that raw recording and turn it into a social clip. Look at what your goals are and see where can I cut time with my production process. You can obviously find a bunch of other tools that do similar things, but honestly, if you can find a one and done solution that is going to, be more bang for your buck, that's what I would look at for evaluating your actual tools. The last point when it comes to recording, before I talk about editing stuff, be mindful of your recording location. Okay? What does that mean? Well, I would say don't record in a place that has 10-foot ceilings. It has hardwood floors and you're recording next to a window, right? Be mindful of what you can control. Obviously, we are not all recording in a nice sound treated studio, so we have to do the best we can. Things I suggest to kind of alleviate a lot of the issues you're going to deal with in post, put curtains up, really heavy curtains. If you can get heavy curtains, great. For your windows, that'll help you with reverb. Put down carpets on your floors. That'll also help. Obviously look at your space that we're going to be recording in, because obviously if you're doing something like a remote recording, you can control that one space, okay? And do the best you can, okay? And a lot of that does come from experimentation and kind of seeing what are the issues that I'm dealing with in post that I can try to eliminate at the time of recording. So be mindful of your location. Obviously, if you've got screaming kids that are down the hall, maybe don't record when they're awake. Record in the evening. Those are things you can control. Okay. Now I want to move on to editing because editing is fun. It's the fun thing. Just a quick overview of what things I'm going to be covering process-wise. Okay, so in terms of key editing processes, I'm going to be looking at these 4 things. These are important, okay? And these are also things that no matter what DAW you use, you can do this, okay? I mean, this is important to say. Yes, I'm using Audition, but it doesn't matter because these 4 things are in any DAW, okay? So we're going to be looking at noise reduction, compression, normalization, and EQ. If you do these 4 things, your audio quality will improve tenfold. I guarantee you. It's also worth saying that overdoing these things can ruin your audio. Okay? There's a fine line between too much processing and not enough. And my methodology and what I'm going to show you is that less is more in this case. Okay? We could take noise reduction and compression up to like the nth degree, but the problem is that's going to make our podcast sound, in my opinion, less genuine, less intimate, and more like, talk radio. And maybe we don't want talk radio. We want this to be fairly warm and open and inviting to our audience to kind of share in the conversation. Okay. So I think that is all when it comes to overview. Let's dive right in, shall we? Shall we dive right in? I think we're going to dive right in. So again, I edited this podcast. I'm in Adobe Audition first and foremost. And I'm going to just first check and change my audio. Okay, we should be good there. Okay. So this is the funny thing. We have a test episode, and this test episode was recorded in Riverside, and it was a fake podcast that we're calling Brian and Elsie Talks Movies. And our first episode, of course, is a holiday movie, right? So we have to have a holiday movie. It's around Christmas time, right? And we decided to do a very quick review on the Netflix comedy movie-ish, Hot Frosty.
Come on now.
Comedy movie. Come on.
We had a good time.
We did have a good time.
We had a great time.
Worth mentioning this. We did have a good time.
Yes.
But I just want to say that's what the content is. And I've already teased that I will probably be releasing this on the full episode on my own podcast, the Cinema Psycho Show.
As well as the last episode of the feed. We're going to do
right.
the last episode of the feed all the way at the end. Yeah. So
That's
that you
right.
guys can listen to all this stuff.
So this was recorded in Riverside. It was audio only. Okay. If you were recording with video, one thing I would point out is that make sure you are using the constant frame rate version of either side of your ISO tracks, just because it's going to make sure that everything's aligned. But with audio, you really don't have that problem. Okay. And we're gonna do what I call like the cooking show thing. So I'm gonna show you a couple little tricks to kind of do some editing, but then I'll show you kind of what the fully edited file looks like. Okay. So I have in here my side of the conversation. I have Elsie's side of the conversation. And then I have a couple music files that I'm going to be using as kind of like my theme music. Okay. So just looking at these, we can get an idea of what our problem points are going to be. Okay. So if we just look at Elsie's audio here, her audio came in fairly consistent in terms of volume, but the volume is kind of topped out at around -15 dB. Okay. So knowing this, we know that we're probably going to have to add a little bit of boost in the volume and kind of mess with that. Okay. So that's important to note. With my audio, on the other hand, my audio came in fairly consistent at the sound level of topping around -6, but I got a lot of peaks and valleys. So that just means that my audio probably needs a bit of compression to boost up my quiet parts and quiet down my loud parts. Okay. So just looking at the waveform can give you some clues into what things you're going to have to do. All right. Now, the first thing you're going to want to do no matter what, okay, is noise reduction. Now we can look at this audio, and if I zoom in, say like on myself right here, okay, the parts where I'm not talking are fairly quiet, but I'm going to tell you this right now. Whether or not you record in a studio or you record in your home, you're going to have noise no matter what. And so noise reduction is kind of no matter what, you have to do it, because once we start boosting our audio levels, once we start playing around with frequencies, once we start doing all of these things to our audio, if there's noise there, even if it's imperceivable to your ears, that is going to pop up as we start to add these processes. So I like to do noise reduction no matter what. It's really easy inside of Audition. all we got to do is select a portion where I'm not talking, and then we'll go up to effects. We'll go up to noise reduction restoration. I'm going to choose capture noise print. It's going to say, hey, are you sure you want to use that? Yes, I do. And we'll click OK. And now that's captured that noise profile that it's going to compare my audio with against and try to cancel out. So we'll then go up to effects. We'll go up to noise reduction restoration, noise reduction process. And this is where we get this scary window. Okay. Really, all this is showing me is, hey, this is what the noise profile of that noise looks like. And then we have two sliders. How much we want to reduce, how much percentage we want to reduce the noise reduction, and then what level of dB are we reducing it by. Okay. Now, I'll tell you right now, depending on your audio, this is a kind of a sliding scale. Okay. If I bring this all the way down, it's not going to remove any noise. If I bring it all the way up, it's going to remove all of it, which may or may not sound great. Okay. This audio was recorded fairly well, so honestly, I don't have to be totally aggressive with it. I'm going to keep it roughly at around 90%. And then you can decide here how much you want to reduce by. I think 19 dB is okay. One little tip that I'll tell you is that if you want to just double check and make sure that you're not cutting into your voice, click this output noise button, output noise only, and then play through. If you hear your voice coming through, that's a good sign that you're cutting too much into your voice, and it's going to result in a robotic and distorted voice afterwards. Okay. So just that's kind of a little trick, little hack there to kind of make sure that you're not cutting too much into your voice. Okay. So I'm going to just turn this off because I don't want to output only the noise, and I'm going to hit apply. Okay. And it's going to go through, it's going to listen to all of my noise, and it's going to knock it out. If I had a lot of noise, you'd probably see this turn into this, straight line like I have across here. But you're going to do that to both your side of the conversation and then also your guest side of the conversation. And I say this is the first step because the next step is actually normalization, or amplifying your signal to a proper loudness level. Okay. You're going to hear this over and over again during this editing session of amplifying your signal to a proper loudness level. And this is the first step. Okay. So I'm actually going to use my example for right now. Okay. Since I'm already on it. All right. And I'm going to apply the normalization effect. And the nice thing about Audition is that you actually have like some presets built in. So like you can just hit the normalized -3 dB. That's a built-in preset that you can just hit. Or you can go through kind of the old-fashioned way of going to effects, amplitude and compression, and then choose something like normalize process. And then in here, you can say, hey, I want to normalize this to -3 dB. I like to keep it at -3 dB. I think that gives you enough audio headroom to manipulate. So, but honestly, there's no hard and fast rule. I would not normalize to 0. That's just me though, because I want to make sure I have some space to work with. So -3 dB is what I like to keep it to. I'll hit apply. It's going to run through that process, and you're going to see that my peaks really popped up so that now my audio, no matter what, is normalized or boosted up slightly to that -3 dB. And this is also where, if you didn't do noise reduction, you would see your noise floor really start to increase, and you'd start to hear that noise there. Okay. Now, I'm going to do that to Elsie's. We're going to pretend that we did noise reduction. Okay. And we're going to do amplitude compression, normalize, -3 dB. We'll hit apply, and it's going to boost it up nicely. Just like so. Okay. And so you might say, hey, I'm done. Not really. Okay. Remember our initial look at these files, right? This one, perfectly leveled, honestly, fine enough. But this one, not so much. Okay. And that is where the next step of compression comes into play. Okay. Compression is kind of scary. And a lot of podcasters who are just new at audio, they really are like, I don't know how compression works. All you really have to think about it is that it is, I like to use the analogy that we came up with when we had Mike Russell from Music Radio Creative on of squish and boost, because that is really what it does. Okay. It takes your quiet parts and boosts that up, and it takes your loud parts and it squishes it down, okay? And for my audio right here, it's necessary because I have those peaks and valleys. For Elsie's, it's not really a big deal, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some compression, and you can do this under amplitude and compression, and then there are a couple different flavors inside of Audition. You could use the dynamics effect to apply some compression, or one of my favorites is the single band compressor just because it's easy, okay? So let me bring this over here. Where do I got it? Oh, I think I have. Let me do this again. Single band compressor. I probably have it hidden somewhere as a window. That's why I'm not seeing it. But either way, oh, here it is. This is what happens when you have like 50 windows going on, is this. So let me do that one more time here. Amplitude and compression and single band compressor. There it is. All right. So this is the single band compressor. One thing I am going to do is turn on my preview window up here, this little button right up here. This is what I love about Audition specifically, is that, you know, I can't really visualize what my compression is doing, but by clicking this little preview button up here, it actually allows me to see before I commit the changes what those processes are doing. So by default, what this effect does is you pick a threshold that you want the compressor to kick in. You pick what the ratio, how much compression you're going to apply. You're going to pick how fast that compressor kicks in, which is called attack. And then how fast the release of that compressor is when we're no longer in the threshold amount, okay? And then the last thing is just how much you're going to output the gain of. So, you know, obviously we're going to compress this, which means we have to boost the gain up slightly. Now, this picked up a lot of what I did previously, which is why, you know, we're fine here. But, you know, if I just adjust this slider here, you'll see this update, and you can see that that has compressed down my audio tremendously, okay? So this just means that I'm really squishing that down, which means I'm going to have to increase my output gain to get it to a proper level, okay? And I can tell you right now, that's not what I would do. I would probably, again, hit a light touch with this. So I like to kind of keep it around, you know, negative 15 dB, and, you know, maybe boost this back down a bit, because we already did some normalization, so we don't have to do too much. And I'm just trying to eyeball it to get the peaks up here to hit around -3. And that's where we do kind of have to adjust this. But this is the why I love Audition, is because I can visually see what the process is doing, okay? Ratio amount, you know, you can go up to like 4:1. I like to keep it at 3. At lowest would be 2. If you do 1:1, you're not doing anything, okay? Attack, I like to keep that at 0 because I want it to hit whenever the voice comes in that hits the threshold. And then release, I keep it at 100 milliseconds. Okay. We'll hit apply. And that basically makes our audio, at least our individual tracks, good to go. Okay. So I do want to, before I jump into the multi-track, I do want to answer a question that popped up here. Okay. I'm going to answer this question here. So this is from, let's see here. So this is from Mark, and I'm going to throw your question up here. And it's, I use Auphonic for audio leveling. Is that a good alternative? You use whatever works for you. I'll be honest with you. Auphonic is great. It's a great alternative to apply. I would either use it before you bring them in to Audition, so kind of get all your ISO tracks leveled out, or you can do it at the end of the chain after you've gone and done everything. But either of those works. Either of those works. Good questions. Keep them coming. All right, let's jump back into editing really quick here. I do want to show this off here. So once you've actually done all of the work of getting your ISO tracks taken care of, we're going to go into multi-track, okay? So I'm going to hit multi-track, and we're just going to make just this. We'll throw this up on. Don't do what I'm doing. Don't just throw up on your desktop. Actually do like for reals, okay? Throw it on a hard drive or something. And I'm going to hit none here, okay? So we'll hit OK, and we're going to bring in our tracks, okay? Multi-track is really where the magic happens when it comes to editing. So I'm going to drop in Elsie's track here. It's going to say, hey, I got to convert the sample rate. That's okay. And we'll do the same thing with my track. Hit OK. And it's going to go through the process of taking our audio and converting the sample rate. And that's because when we recorded in Riverside, it did 4,800. Podcast audio is around 4,100. Okay. But now we have our tracks perfectly aligned. Okay. Now, in terms of editing and content, one thing I'm going to tell you, if you're in Audition or honestly any program, is try to use, they might call it a time selector, or I think it's like literally just looks the same thing where honestly you can select portions. But I like editing this way because I can then map my hotkey. This is to save you some time, to ripple delete across tracks. Okay, so this is really cool. So I know, for instance, that this has a little bit of me saying like, hey, we're about to start now and we're going to go into a hook, right? So I can select this portion and I have a hotkey of F5 on my keyboard. So when I hit F5, automatically deletes the space and does a ripple delete across the tracks. Okay, so if we'll just play this through. Did Netflix just give Mean Girls an unexpected holiday sequel? We're talking Hot Frosty today on Brian and Elsie Talk Movies. Okay, so we have a little bit of a hook. That's important thing to put in your podcast episodes. A little bit of a hook. Okay, I want to have a little bit of a gap here where my music's going to come in. So I'll just use the razor tool and hold down Shift so it cuts across both tracks here. And then we can select and move this down. Okay. And I might also trim this up here because then Elsie starts talking and I do. And then we'll throw in some music. Okay. So I'm going to throw in a little bit of music here. And kind of have that go there. And obviously I want this to kind of just last for the hook part and then go into a real theme music, which is right here. Okay. Now, as you're adding in clips, it's important to note that we again want to do some leveling to our audio. Okay. And we did that with our ISO tracks, but as we bring in like music clips, you're going to notice that they're kind of all at different levels. And this is something, this process here that I'm going to show you is something that I think only Audition does, but it may be something that you see in other programs too that have these different multi-track functions. So I'm going to select all of my tracks here and I'm going to right click and choose match clip loudness. Okay. And this is a trick I learned from Mike Russell from Music Radio Creative. I can't take, credit for this one, but it's a great trick that has helped me out with my audio quality. So whatever this says here, target loudness -23 LUFS, just keep it standard, click OK. What that's going to do is it's going to be kind of like Auphonic and get all of your tracks around the same level. You're going to see that background music that was really loud has gone down. Okay. And my track has gone down. Elsie's track has gone down a little bit. So it's kind of all summing it together. So match loudness in the multi-track view, important first step once you start adding clips in. Okay. In terms of editing after that, okay, we obviously can add in some, push this a little bit over here so that it does kind of, blend off of this. I am going to bring this audio down a bit because I want this to be a little quieter as I'm talking. So that when we play this back a little bit, did Netflix just give Mean Girls an unexpected holiday sequel? We're talking Hot Frosty today on Brian and Elsie Talk Movies. Yeah. So I've got a little bit of music playing, and then I want our conversation to start coming in at this point. And that is where I will slide my clips over. I like to add a little bit of curve on the envelopes, and then I'm going to start keyframing the volume. This is an important thing to note. If you want, say, your audio bed to dip down a bit and then kind of fade off, this is where adding in some keyframes. I call them keyframes because I come from an animation background, but I think they're called just points in the handles here. But I want the volume to dip down a bit so that then when we get to Elsie kind of introing.
Hello, I am Elsie.
And I'm Brian.
Hey, how about that? So, Hot Frosty.
Okay, so we've got some music playing in the background. That's great. I might shorten this up because I want it to fade off right as the conversation gets going. All right. But that's kind of a good hook in intro. Okay. Now, as it comes to actually physically editing this thing, there's some things I want you to keep in mind. There's really two processes that I would do. Okay. So we noticed that right here at the very beginning, I talk over Elsie. Okay. And that happens all the time, right? You're really excited about a topic. You want to get into it, but more often than not, like, especially when you're remote recording, you might accidentally talk over the person. And this is where the benefit of having ISO tracks come into play, because maybe I only want, me saying, hi, I'm Brian, and not the me talking over Elsie part, right? So what I'll do is kind of decide based off of listening to it. I'm Brian. And decide like, hey, I want to fade myself down at that point. And so this is kind of a tedious thing, but it is important to do this because you don't want, especially in the first few seconds of a podcast, to really take away from that professionalism. So, play this back now.
Hello, I am Elsie. And obviously. Hey, how about that?
So me saying I'm Brian. Let's bring that up a bit over here. I want the laughing part. Now we're gonna move this around a bit here. So this is really just a matter of kind of picking and choosing what parts you want to have said and what parts you don't. Actually, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do it to Elsie's section here, because I say, hi, I'm Brian, and I want that there. Let's bring that down.
I am Elsie.
And I'm Brian. There we go. So that you're just picking and choosing what parts of the audio you want. And then I'm going to, just because I did that, we've got a gap of time there, and I want to kind of clean that up. So this is where, again, we can come in with our time selection tool and just do a ripple delete right there to clean up that section. And this is something you'd want to do. You listen through your episode. Yes, it's going to take time, but if you've got, an ISO tracks for each person, find out what are the most important parts. This is the editing part of editing, right? Going through, deciding if there's parts where you're talking over each other, if there are parts that maybe aren't relevant to the conversation. That's kind of the process of editing. Okay. But you really could see it's not that difficult. It's just putting in keyframes if you're talking over each other and cutting out sections really easily using the ripple delete. The last thing I want to show is just kind of some different effects to apply to the tracks. So obviously the one effect I would apply no matter what to any voice is EQ. Okay. So doing that is relatively simple. We can do EQ, parametric equalizer, and it's going to look scary. It's going to look a bit like this. That's okay, because we can just add in some points here. Just a very simple kind of EQ you can do is something where you cut out the low end, you add a little bit of that low end up, and then increase a little bit of the high end, and then kind of cut a little bit of the midtones. Okay. This kind of EQ curve works for most voices, but obviously every voice is different. And it does show you kind of what this whole thing looks like once it's all done. Let me show you just our completed episode, which looks like this. Okay. So this is me. I've gone through, I have cut all the parts up. I've added in some intro music, added in some outro music. Myself and Elsie have some EQ applied to our voices. And then we export this thing as a WAV file. Okay. And then to the WAV file, we'll do one final thing, which is, again, normalization, but this time inside of the waveform view. And this effect here really is just using the match loudness one more time. We drop this track in, set it to, I usually use -16 LUFS, hit process, and that's what you export out your MP3. Okay. I could go all day into editing, very easily could. But once you're done editing, that's where you get to show notes. That's where you get to art. That's where you get to publishing. And I'm going to throw it to my guests next.
All right. Thank you so much.
And I
I
covered a lot of
know,
stuff there.
yeah, there's a lot of information there. And Mark, I see you. I see you that you got a little overwhelmed with all the jargon. I totally get it. And I promise, if you just pause a moment and go back to what Brian has said, there are some key, and I think that might be something for us to also start to look at, to create a little bit of a glossary so that we can look back, because a lot of those terms manifest themselves across the board with almost anything that you are editing with, including all the visual editors. There are some things that kind of just say normalize the audio or level out the audio, and you don't have the exact little things, like they do all the magic behind the scenes, which is why some of us do the alphonic way. I personally really like alphonic, especially when I'm doing things on the fly and fast, because it does everything that Brian mentioned in the back end, outside of the editing part. And there's a lot of people who actually do that whole editing part for you, like things like Descript and things. In fact, we have a whole entire live about that. But yeah, so I hear you totally, and I know it's a lot, but if you go back, this is going to be amazing. So does anybody else have
some of these questions? I'll answer some of these questions at the end too. So like I'm actually on my end, I'm favoriting all of these, and I'm going to answer these questions. So I understand that it's a lot. The benefit is that these are processes you're going to see no matter what DAW you use.
Yep. Absolutely. All right. So I already have my WAV file according to what Brian has sent to me, the WAV file. So now I'm going to take it over and we're going to work on some of the metadata show notes situation, about part of it. So let's go ahead and start seeing that on the screen here.
There you go.
All right. So we got here. So what exactly are show notes? We're going to talk a little bit about show notes, because this is something that a lot of people ask me questions about. I'm not going to go super, super deep in it. And there's a lot more sort of slides set up in here because I didn't want to walk through step by step to not help you out. But we are going to be focusing specifically on show notes for your show within your RSS feed. I'm not going to be talking about SEO show notes. I'm not going to be talking website optimization. I'm going to be talking on device, the show notes that people see when they consume content, your podcast, on their podcast app of choice. That's what I'm talking about, your show notes in the RSS feed. So literally what they are is the textual accompaniment to a podcast episode that you put out, right? So it's just the words that go along with it. That's it. They usually provide context for your show. They are very easy. They're reference. They're additional information to help your audience stay engaged and get more. That's it. The images that you see here, you see the stuff on that side there, that's the feed on the left-hand side on Apple Podcast. You see the middle part, that's the Spotify. And then you see the website. All of this stuff is inside of the RSS feed. And this is from the feed, the official Libsyn podcast. So you get an opportunity to see what those look like in all of those three areas, right? All right. So why do you need that? Why? Because this is really just for your audience. Your audience is the one that is going to benefit from all of the stuff that you put in front. They discover additional resources. You're taking care of them. They engage so much more deeply with your content because a lot of us need extra reference points, and they connect with you on social media. So to me, those are the key ways. Now, what you see moving in front of you is from Overcast, the podcast app, and you see how all of my show notes are nicely formatted inside of Overcast. So let's go and look through the show notes do's and the show notes don'ts. And I am very much summarizing all of the things. Again, remember the context. I am doing this for the podcast app. I'm not doing this for a website. I'm not doing it for SEO purposes. I'm doing it for helping your audience. So do include links, brands, sources, guests, references. All of those things are essential for you to share with your audience, especially if you want them to follow through with you. Useful information. So if you think about it, what is that bit of information that you want your audience to really be able to reference back after they consume your podcast episode? Use clear formatting. So what does that mean? Spacing, bullets, headers, Sometimes the headers is really just having one sentence on its own and then a space and then another paragraph comes after that. It's really to support quick scanning of the content and keep it concise. Keep it so that if somebody opens it up on their phone, you can quickly skim it and quickly find the information that the audience is looking for. Please do not rely heavily on code. It's never going to look the way that you want it to. So advanced HTML or other code won't be supported across all podcast apps. That's just the truth. There's nothing that supports everything across the board. Forget platform differences, meaning don't forget platform differences. There's things that happen in Apple Podcast that don't happen on Spotify. There's things that happen in whatever, insert your podcast app that don't somewhere else. You can never find them all to support absolutely everything. Do not use complex formatting. So no nested subtitle or sublists or indentation on text. It almost never is supported. And if you have a long outline or a super indented something or other, it's not going to look the way that you want it to look. It doesn't really support too much in terms of block quotes. I suggest using plain old like actual quotation marks, and it won't do any kind of formatting for citations or footnotes and things like that. It's not going to show up on your show notes. And please do not ignore mobile consumers, because in fact, the majority of your audience is going to be consuming the podcast in a podcast app on their mobile device. Regardless of how it is. So you have to keep that moving forward. Those are the key components for show notes, do's and notes again from here. So now we're going to go into a fundamental elements of show notes for your podcast. And for me, I'm using the reference of my podcast, the feed. A lot of people tell me that I have great show notes, and I tend to use the same type of template no matter what show notes I'm creating. So obviously the title is very important. Then right after that, I have a quick synopsis or take on whatever that episode is. So you could be as broad. We cover a lot of information on our podcast, so it really has a lot more information. But for the hot frosty, which you'll see here soon, you'll be able to see that the information for that is actually much, much smaller because we were only covering one podcast. And it's more of a take versus a summary of what we do inside the episode. The next thing is a call to action. Your first call to action. That should be in that upper portion of your podcast versus the lower part. Have it right at the top of the page. Again, you're optimizing for mobile browsing, and that's the first thing that they're going to see. If you tell them you need to sign up for this thing, you need to call the show, like that key call to action needs to be right at that top portion of your page. Then I like to go into the episode highlights, right? So that episode highlights and timestamps, I really like them to be right below that first call to action because now it's referencing the actual content. After that, then we go into those references and resources, all that extra information that makes your show notes so super juicy. And then lastly, you have those call to actions that you want people to take that are less in your face. Like if you want somebody to sign up for something you're doing or you're doing a meetup or something, have those at the top. The bottom calls to action are essentially the calls to action you always ask. Like, let's say you love your community on Instagram, have the link to that. Let's say you really, really want them to sign up for your newsletter, have that there also. Follow us on social, leave us a 5-star review or something along those lines, right? Have those more towards the bottom because that's going to be in all of your show notes. In fact, those calls to action to me, follow the show on Apple Podcasts, follow the show on YouTube, whatever. I have all of that always at the bottom. So those are the fundamental elements of podcast show notes. Then we have the fundamental formatting of podcast show notes. Short paragraphs. is the number one thing. Do not make a bunch of text come together. The next thing, time codes and headers. As you can see here, you'll see that those are short paragraphs here. There's actually 2. Then we have another call to action here. And then I have the headers. You can see the headers moving all the way there. In fact, when you're looking at this, maybe you're watching us do this in a small little device. Maybe you're watching on your phone. You could still, when you look at this, see writing and then see spaces. So you see how it's broken down. The sections are important because the eye can scan really quickly and see the difference in all these different places. Bullets, links, also very important. If you mention something on your show, that's when you link it and you can see the difference there. Spacing and text formatting is so important. Again, as you can see from that image, even if you're looking at it from far away, you see that there's differentiation to the eye, and you actually can tell that there's bits and pieces moving from one place to the next. So it allows your audience to orient itself when they're looking for certain things. Sometimes they'll open it up and go, oh my gosh, when did they mention the call to action? When did they mention that interview? When does the interview start? Maybe they just want to go to the interview process instead of anything else. Maybe they want to just scan to the links. You'll be able to see all of those things right away. So now let's go ahead and look at the template. I work off of templates all the time. And so I created a template for this new podcast. Brian and Elsie at the movies. I don't even know. I forgot what it's called. Our own podcast. I forgot the name.
Brian and Elsie talk movies.
Brian and Elsie talk movies. Thank you so much. So we have this new podcast. And so what I did is based on when we recorded, because we actually had little notes for each other, based on when we recorded, I kind of crafted the idea, the framework of how we naturally worked together. And I thought, oh, that looks like a template for us to continue recording to each other. So I did that same thing here. We have the title, we have the movie name, what we talked about. This is a template on the left-hand side. And then we have quick synopsis, Elsie's take, Brian's perspective, and then shared thoughts that we had here. And I just have like bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3. And I broke it all the way down, calls to action at the bottom, references, right? Same exact thing. And all of this I did in an text app called Obsidian. Now that is what I use, but we'll see in the next slide that there's many that you can use. In fact, it just needs to be plain text just so that I can very easily create a template, and then I duplicate the template every single time that I do an episode, and I just fill in the information based on that. So based on the template, I filled out all of the information on the opposite side. Super easy to do after you have it. You can actually start working on this minus the exact time codes. That's probably the last thing that you'll add, because I didn't have the finished file. I had the content because I was there with Brian recording and we prepped together, and I had the raw file, so I knew what we covered, but I didn't have the exact time codes, which I didn't write, but I could fill everything else in there, right? So we have the quick synopsis at the top, we have the episode highlights and timestamps, and the references and resources and the information and calls to action. So that is the basic over of it all. And you can tweak it depending upon what you do. You don't have to do all of it, but at least you'll be able to have like those little sections that are the most helpful to your audience. That's how I always frame it. What is the most helpful to my audience? All right. So now moving from here, we actually can do everything I just did that you saw in my text app of choice, which is Obsidian. You can do all of that stuff directly into the Libsyn UI. You do not have to actually have something else. But I tend to prefer that because sometimes I'm working in different scenarios. Sometimes I'm not connected online. Sometimes I'm working on my phone. Sometimes I don't have the right information with me. And I don't like to work on platforms online because I have been burned many times before. and I've lost my work. So this is my personal preference. So I tend to use apps like these. These are text apps right at the top. On the left-hand side is an app that is Mac only, that is called Byword. It really just works specifically just with text. Obsidian is my favorite here. Then obviously we have the Notes app from Apple, and then OneNote, which is a Microsoft product that is a very, very good app. One of the things that all of these over here have going for them is that they sync across devices. So at any time I can be on the go working on my show notes, and I can tweak them, I can delete them, I can add things to them, and it just helps the process so much easier for me. I've added these ones on the right-hand side. This is Google Docs, Notion, and ClickUp, because there are some of us that do work with other people. And I have found that Google Docs is probably one of the most easiest to work collaborative. So if there is a co-host that you're working with, or maybe you have a guest that you want to collaborate on your show notes with, or maybe you happen to have somebody helping you with your podcast, whether it's somebody at home, you're roping in your children and or partner to help you out a little bit, or you actually can hire somebody to help you out. These are easier tools to share. These ones here are slightly harder to do, although Microsoft OneNote actually does work pretty well for collaborative stuff. But these ones are made a little bit easier to collaborate if you want to scale up. But again, after you finish doing all of these things, after you've finished your show notes, you can put that information into the podcast hosting platform. In this case, Libsyn supports all of the things. So you don't really have to work outside of Libsyn. I just prefer to do that. And I also like it as a reference because sometimes I need to do a quick search for something. I don't know when I covered whatever topic. It's easier for me to to search inside of my computer than it is for me to go on my own RSS feed and start looking for when I covered whatever topic. It's just easier for me to do reference and looking back at topics that I've covered in the past. So once you put all of that information into Libsyn, that's when all of that goes out into all of the different podcast apps, right? So everything that you've written down goes to all of these parts. But then you're saying to me, wait, hold on. You're just talking about text apps. I know, but the thing is we have to do the show notes that go inside of the interface when your audio file is released. So now we're going to go all the way back to talk about metadata. All right. So metadata, I tried to find one of the best metaphors that I possibly could. And I had a little bit of help from ChatGPT. And ChatGPT said that metadata is basically your episode's way of saying, hey, here's why you'll love me. And I thought, wow, that is such a wonderful way to be able to do that. And so it's like the little label. If you're going to pick donuts or cupcakes or whatever, it's whatever is on the outside of the box that tells people what flavor it is. It would be so great. Or even like a box of chocolates. Isn't it amazing when it has that information on the outside and you're able to like look at the information and pick your chocolate? That's what metadata is here, right? So it's essentially title, description, author name, episode number, and episode artwork. And this all has to do with your episode. Because remember, we're talking about episode production right now. We're not talking about the overarching thing. So for each episode, you have this information that helps people make choices based on the content. It just helps you be found. So the metadata, as we were talking about before, the episode 1 is the title of the episode. Then right beneath it, we have the description or the hot take or the summary right above that, right below that. And then we have the main call to action, which I'm asking for people to call the show, to engage with us, and to email us. Those are the key things. And then the episode highlights. Those are time codes that I've already figured out. So those are the key metadata that I want to put into my MP3 file that Brian so sweetly gave me. So I have the uncompressed WAV file he sent to me. And at this time here, I sort of renamed it with 001 underscore with the name of the movie. Naming conventions I'm a big fan of. And so we put it in here, and now I'm going to import this audio into an ID3 editor. I tend to use this one. It's called Forecast. It's a free app. Unfortunately, it's for Mac only, but there are plenty of ID3 editors. Just to call out, you can do all of this ID3 metadata implementation within the DAW of choice that you choose as well. I prefer to use this because I love Forecast, how it optimizes the encoding of WAV files directly as a podcast. And again, it's free. It's kind of nutty. So I import that audio there. And then once I import the audio, then I add that information that I had in the show notes. I put the title in there. I make sure that the podcast name is at the top, the title, and then a little bit of that summary that I already had, literally copy and paste. And then I just add the time codes, exactly what I did before. And so those time codes are there. All of that information, again, it's like the box of chocolates, right? It's embedding the information into the file itself. So when you look at it, or somebody else happens to get maybe this raw MP3 file, it has this information in there and they know what kind of chocolate it is. Okay. All right. So over here, it says draw. So what does that even mean? I tend to prefer using episode artwork, which is unique to the episode because it helps to promote the show whenever it goes out on social media in all kinds of different ways. We can repurpose and find so much social after that. So let's go ahead and move into our podcast artwork. Okay, so I did the podcast artwork, or actually Brian created the template. Same thing, template as you see on the left-hand side. So here's the episode artwork. It was done in Canva. And then what I did is I duplicated the template. And then let's pretend we're going to be covering Dear Santa. I literally just added the image of Jack Black's Dear Santa movie. I removed the background. I'm going to put it in there. And then all of a sudden, I have an episode artwork for the next podcast episode, and it came out kind of nice. So maybe we should cover Dear Santa at some point, although I don't pay for Paramount Plus, and I was sad that it's only there. But I did all this in Canva, and it seems to work pretty good. So now I have that podcast artwork there for me to keep moving forward. And the last thing I do is I just grab that episode and I drop it into the ID3 encoder there and save it, and boom, I have it right there. So now we have all the information on the left-hand side are the show notes that I now have and I can use to market my podcast because it's all for me to have there, nice and helpful. I've embedded all of the metadata into the MP3. As you can see, the file itself ended up you can see exactly what it is. My next step now, though, is to put all of this information into Libsyn, into the podcast platform hosting of choice, because they're going to finish the deets there. All right. I think that I'm finished with my section. So if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer something here. If not, hold on to your questions and we can continue forward, moving to the next little bit.
We have a couple questions related to audio.
Oh, we do.
Do we want to save those for the end, or we want to tackle those now?
Let's go ahead and continue moving forward, if that's okay. And that way we can we can go to Emilio and we can take care of all the other stuff. That would be great.
All right. Sounds good. So like they've mentioned so far, we've recorded our episode. We have it edited. We have our title, our show notes, and some extras there as well, like the artwork. And so now the question is, what is the best way to get your episode out to your audience? And so I'm throwing up a slide here. And something I hear from new podcasters sometimes is, why can't I just directly upload my episodes to those listening apps. And the issue with this is kind of twofold. One is that it would take a long time for you to upload each individual episode to each listening platform anytime you wanted to upload an episode. And then two, most of those listening apps don't take the direct uploads because it would take a lot of space on their servers, and they want a specific format. So that is where a media hosting platform like Libsyn comes into play. And so on here on the screen, I have exactly what these media hosting platforms are going to do, whether that is Libsyn or a different platform. So this will apply either way. So the first thing they're going to do is store all of your content. So that's all your podcast information, all of your episode information, all the media files that you have. They're going to take those and store them or host them and then be able to serve them out when you need them. The next thing they're going to do is format all of that into an RSS feed. And that is that format that those listening platforms are looking for to bring all that information in to get it onto their apps. Next, they're going to update that RSS feed anytime you make changes. So that's updating an episode or uploading a new episode or making any changes to your podcast in general. They're going to be the ones to update that RSS feed so that the listening apps know that you've made a change and they can then display that. In addition to all of that, they're also going to provide some extra features. So you can think of embeddable players, stats, a website for your podcast, and the list can kind of go on and on from there about the different features that they provide. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. So now let's go on to this next slide here about how to upload and publish an episode. And so again, these are going to apply whether you're in Libsyn or with another platform, but we'll go ahead and jump into how that looks within Libsyn in a couple minutes. So the first thing you're going to do is simply select that you want to create a new episode. And most of these hosting platforms are going to have just a couple clicks to select that you want a new episode. From there, you're going to add the media file. And so that is that finished file that Brian gave us. It's been edited. You're all set to go with an MP3. Next, you're going to input the episode information. So those are those show notes, the title that Elsie made. We have the podcast artwork, all that information that is additional in addition to that media file. And then from there, you're just going to go ahead and click publish to release that episode or to schedule it at a later date. So from there, let's go ahead and jump into Libsyn to see what that looks like within a UI. And so I've created a little test show here. And all I've done so far is just input the basic settings. So the general podcast artwork, the title, and basically just some very basic settings. I haven't uploaded anything so far. So we can kind of walk through those 4 steps to uploading and publishing a new episode. So the first one there was selecting that you want a new episode. So if we go up here to the top right-hand corner, I'll click on New and select Episode. And that'll bring us to our new episode menu. So that second step is adding that finished media file. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Add Media File here. And within my downloads, I've downloaded that episode that Brian went through the whole process for, right? And so as that's going, you'll see that little slider here working its way to uploading. I'm going to go down a little bit and you'll see all the episode details. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go ahead and copy Elsie's title into here, right? And then down below that, we have our episode description. So I'm going to do the same thing and just copy all of that information into here. So we have all of that set. You'll also see this little flag here for the file upload success. So that's already done. So we have our media file. We have our basic details here. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see some optional details that you can include if you'd like. One here is the season number and episode number if you want to select this. One thing that Apple does that's a little bit different is that they don't like the episode or season numbers within the title. So that's why we have this season number and episode number up here. So you can remove it here, but it'll still be categorized correctly within their app. Down below that, we have whether you'd like to select clean or explicit. There's the author, if you want to add any additional tags within the Libsyn platform. And then just for time's sake, we can go ahead and skip some of those because they are optional, but we are going to add in our episode artwork. So we have this here. And say you have a couple other things, such as an episode transcript, you can also add that in here. So I'll go ahead and show what that looks like, uploading an SRT file here. And so with that, we have all of our media file and episode details all set and ready to go. And at the bottom, you can see our published episode menu. And for availability, we have immediately on publish, or if you want to schedule it in advance, you can use our schedule episode selector there. For now, though, just to show how it looks, I'm going to go ahead and click on immediately on publish, and then go ahead and click publish. And what that's going to do is it's going to start adding all of that information, then that new episode, into your RSS feed to be able for those listening platforms and those podcasting apps to be able to take that episode and display that and have it ready for your audience. So now that that's all set there, the next thing we're going to want to do is add our podcast to those listening platforms. So this is if you're brand new and just created your podcast. I'm going to go up here to the right-hand side, click the little settings or gear icon, and choose destinations. Now here we have a few default for you. And so the first one you'll see is Apple Podcasts, or this Libsyn Classic feed. Right now the connected status means that your Libsyn Classic feed has been created. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on edit here. And the first thing you'll see here are these RSS feed overrides. For the most part, you'll want to leave these blank unless you want to change something about your general podcast settings. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on next. And then from there, you'll have a couple options, whether you want Libsyn to submit the show for you, or whether you want directions for how to submit your show manually through Apple Podcasts Connect. But if you want Libsyn to submit your show for you, you can just go ahead and click submit. I'm not going to click it right now because this is a little test show that we created. And then from there, there are other destinations that we can include. Spotify is even more simple. So you just click your country of origin, you click approve to agree to Spotify's terms of service, and then you click save, and it'll submit to that destination for you. And we have many others down here as well. If you want to submit to iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Audible, all of those that you may want to get your podcast onto. And one thing just to keep in mind is that it's helpful to submit your show a little earlier than when you want your first episode available, because the submission and acceptance process is going to take up to a week. And sometimes it can be pretty quick, but you just want to have that leeway there if you're setting a specific date for your first release. Now, one thing I did want to mention is that if you have any questions or any trouble through this process, our Libsyn podcaster support and success team is here to help, right? So if you go and look in the bottom right corner here, you'll see this little eye. And if you click on that, we have a few different resources for you. The first being different product updates and upcoming events. And then we have a knowledge base that you can go ahead and look within. And within there, we have a ton of articles that are there and available for you. So if you needed more information about publishing your episode, you can just go ahead and select publish. And then we have an episode or an article there about publishing an episode. And you can select open in a new tab if you'd like. And if that doesn't answer your questions, our support team is always here to answer your questions. So you can click on contact us and create a new ticket, or you can just feel free to email us directly at support@libsyn.com. Now, one other thing I wanted to mention before we get into some questions is just some tips for kind of helping with promoting and publishing episodes. So now that we have our episode published here, you can go ahead and click on that, and then we have this little embed button right here. And so we have some quick links for you if you need any links to share that episode, whether that's a direct download, your permalink there in the Libsyn directory. And then beneath that, we have this Get Embed Player. And so we have a few different embed players that you can use within Libsyn, whether that's your full show embed player, which has multiple episodes, or something like this, which just has that one episode. And so there's different options that you can include there. I'm going to go ahead and click on all of these so you can see what that looks like to display the art, the title, the follow button, the share, and the media download as well. And from there, if you want to embed this in a website, you can go ahead and just copy this or click this button. They do the same thing, and go ahead and take that and then embed that within a website or anywhere that you'd like to have that episode available directly right there. In addition to that, I just wanted to mention one thing about publishing an episode. So when you click publish, it's going to release the episode into your RSS feed. And what that does is then makes it available for those podcasting apps to display that. And so one thing that I like to do personally when I'm releasing an episode is I set the release quite early, right? So anytime I have an episode, I'll usually set it to real early in the morning, such as like 1 or 2 in the morning, so that whether people are on the East Coast, West Coast, or in a different place around the world, it's there in time for their morning commute, because it will take a little bit of time for those listening apps and those podcasting apps to update from your RSS feed. So let's see. I think that's about it. And it's pretty simple to get your podcast new episode up and running there and then getting connected to different destinations. So I think we can jump into some of the question portion here. And I don't know if Brian or Elsie, if you wanted to mention anything else in regards to some of the tips for publishing or any promoting tips, or if we should just jump into the questions.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would note is that, and I know that this is something that I've seen a bunch, is if you set it to immediate release, that means that your stats are going to be counting at that point. So you can actually, in the Libsyn dashboard, set it to start counting downloads when that scheduled release goes out. So that's a feature that you do want to put that, especially if you're like, hey, I'm doing this well in advance and I want to make sure that I'm not counting like the times that you click on the link and like listen to it back. I don't know if that happens to you all, but that happens to me sometimes. But that's the one thing I would note is that, if you want your downloads, in your stats to show up properly and you're schedule your stats to start in advance too.
Yep.
Definitely.
I'm just going to go back to the ID3. Wait, there's a couple of ID3 questions there. Mm-hmm. Cynthia asked on ID3 tags, how do you go into old episodes and upgrade the ID3 tags so they are parallel with the upgraded show notes? So I usually go directly into Libsyn when I do this. So you can update the metadata, the description of your chocolate inside of the Libsyn UI. It's really easy to go in there. In fact, I make mistakes all the time. And there's been times when I forget to add the new artwork. And so I'm like, oh no, I forgot to update that artwork. And so I have to go in there and do it and then publish it. And the minute that happens, it actually sort of adds the new stuff inside of the Libsyn UI. So that's a thing. Also to say, because Mark did ask this question here later, where Mark says, I always click update ID3 tags when I publish. What is the difference between adding ID3 tags in an editor versus doing it on Libsyn? So the difference is, meaning I do it that way. Like that's about the extent of it. It is my personal choice to work because I don't like to be connected online when I'm working on my show, because I am constantly being asked to do a bunch of different things. So when I'm working on this specific task, I stay on device. I do all of my work without being connected online. I do everything I need for my podcast, including the ID3 tags locally, because that's what I've been doing forever. You don't have to do that. In fact, if you don't want to do any ID3 tags whatsoever, you don't have to. You're doing what you're doing, Mark. You upload all of that stuff inside of Libsyn and click update on the ID3 tags, and it automatically puts a label or all that metadata into your podcast episode. It just happens. So you don't even have to do that. It does it for you. I personally don't like it, but that is my personal choice. If you want to do it on your own, feel free to do what you're doing. Like you don't get anything extra. You don't get any, you might save some time sometimes, but I just prefer to do my show prep outside of the UI because I prefer that workflow. If you prefer that workflow, you're not losing anything, which is what's so great about Libsyn. In fact, you can do one or the other, depending upon how you like to work.
Yeah, and if I could just
Go
add
ahead.
one thing to that real quick. When you do click the update ID3 tags within the Libsyn UI, it only applies to the possible ID3 tags there. So like your title, the artwork, the description, it's not going to apply to like any chapter markers that you try to include within the description. So it only applies to those options that we have available there within the UI.
Yep.
All right, I want to get to a couple of the editing questions here that were brought up here. So this is from Amy, and this is, does the ripple delete mess up the background music? Yes, it does. And in fact, I would not, just for the sake of demonstrating for this live, I probably would not put my music in until after I have gone through and done that editing of the raw files and had all my sections cut up, because as you saw, it does cut it. So in some programs, like if you're editing in Premiere Pro, which I do that now because I do mostly a video podcast now, you can actually lock the layer so that cuts like that will not affect it. But yes, ripple delete will cut up that music. Just know that in advance. That's why I would put music in after you have done that. Okay, this is one from Lucas, and it is, I wonder what effects you put on the master. So I mentioned before, I don't do a whole ton of processing because, you kind of can run the risk of over processing. One effect that I would apply to the master, and I didn't show this in here, but is a limiter. So a limiter kind of, again, does the whole work of boosting your audio up again to a nice loudness level and making sure that you don't go past that loudness level. Okay. So I like to just set my limiter to -3 again, just because I think that's a sweet spot. One of the worst things that I ever have had to deal with when listening to a podcast is, again, riding the volume knob, especially when you're in the car. I don't know if you two have done that too. So, a limiter is probably the last effect I would apply to my master mix. But that's a very good question. Let's see here. So, okay, this one's kind of related to what we're using for software. But Deborah asks, what studio software are you using for video recording of this session? So you can flip back and forth between the speaker focus and the screen recording while having your picture spotlight. We're using Ecamm Live, as I mentioned before. It's a great piece of software, again, to save time, right? That's kind of the whole point there.
And by the way, Ecamm has a fantastic YouTube channel. You could just go subscribe to their channel there. They walk through, there's so much educational content about almost everything you could possibly want. It's probably goals for most people showing off their software. It's great. They have a fantastic community as well. You can join that on Facebook.
Yep. Okay, so another question I have here is, let's see here. Elsie, this kind of applies to you, and it's from Deb. I have always just put a banner for the name of my podcast. I haven't done per episode artwork. Where does that appear on Libsyn in relation to default podcast art?
Yeah, I think that we showed, do you mind, Emilio, sharing your screen and showing where the episode artwork is there? I think that
Yeah,
you
definitely.
saw that episode artwork being pulled in there. So whenever you go to a specific episode, you can look on that side there and you'll see the episode artwork where you can, when you go edit the podcast, you can see it there. And when you edit that podcast, whatever image you put inside of the episode artwork screen is the one that comes out on the episode. And the way that it shows up is that there are, again, remember how not all podcast apps are the same? There are some podcast apps that support episode artwork. Apple Podcast is one of them. Spotify is another. So if you want to go check out the feed, the official Libsyn podcast, especially on Spotify, it's pretty easy to see that. If you go to the show page, meaning where you follow our show on Spotify for the feed, the official Libsyn podcast, you'll be able to see that in all the episodes, there's like a different image for each one of the episodes, and it just helps it look nicer overall. Because remember, we want people to choose it. So you could do it there. Now, if you don't update an episode artwork there, then what it does is it defaults to the show artwork and it just pulls it for you. Like it just pulls the show artwork for you. And there is no differentiator inside of episode artwork. You don't have to have it there, but it is there for that to happen. I think, and there's another thing in the UI, if you don't mind still sharing that screen, Emilio, and can you take us to again, editing the episode, tap through there, and then scroll all the way down to the release date. Somebody asked what that setting was about, that Brian mentioned, and the availability on the published episode there.
Yeah. Definitely.
Go ahead and talk us through that.
Yeah. So when you click on a new episode, if you have it set to immediately on publish, it doesn't apply. So that's why it wasn't originally shown there, right? But if you schedule in advance, that's where this media availability comes into play.
Yep.
And so there's always available, and then based on the release schedule. So always available means that even if it's set in the future at a certain point to be released, the direct download URL is immediately available to you, and therefore the stats begin counting right as you click publish, even though the episode is not released into your RSS feed yet. If you set it to be based on the release schedule, nothing gets released yet until the episode, like the time and the date, is set for that time. So the direct download is not available. It's not in your RSS feed, and the stats don't start counting yet because it's all based on the release schedule. So this is usually preferred based on the release schedule. Where always available comes in hand is if you have, say, other people that you need to listen to the episode and who maybe need to approve it in advance, then you may want to select this, so then you can then share that direct download link with them so they can listen to that, or if they want to share it with a select group before releasing it outside of that.
Good call out there. Yeah, I'm glad that was in there. Okay, a couple here that came in regarding posting times. So Deb says, how much lead time do I need to schedule for publishing as a rule? What are your thoughts on that?
I don't really have a set time, other than the fact that I like to release the episode Tuesdays at 9 a.m. And there's times when I'm able to be done with all the work that we just showed, like on Sunday. Sometimes I'm done on Saturday. Sometimes I'm done on Monday. Sometimes I'm done at 8:45 on Tuesday morning. So it depends on when I'm done. So if I do have the benefit of having it done prior, then I'll just schedule it for Tuesday at 9 a.m. and I'll let it go then. So I don't hold myself to have to schedule it there, because again, our show is very much of the moment versus there's a lot of people who batch produce, especially if you're doing like an interview show or like a topic-based series show, or maybe a season show where you're doing 13 episodes and you're done with the 13. You can schedule those whenever you want and just allow them to be done. My show is very much like evergreen topic, non-evergreen, topical, more news-based, and thus that's why I don't prepare prior.
For me, I would love to get it out Wednesday in the morning, but like you, Elsie, it's like sometimes I hit that, sometimes I'm not able to. So I mean, I like to record on Sundays. That gives me Monday and Tuesday to kind of get the episode done, with the hope that Wednesday is when it goes out. But really, it's like with everything in podcasting, it depends, and it's kind of depends on you, your bandwidth, your availability, but I mean, and also your show, what type of show you have. But Emilio, what about you? What's your thoughts on scheduling?
Yeah, so I just want to kind of address this in a different way in terms of getting it released to the RSS feed versus the podcasting apps. So when you set it to release, that's going to release it to your RSS feed, and then from there, those podcasting apps can then update your listing on their apps from there. And so that can take up to 24 hours for any destinations that you're connected to if they're running behind that day. But it usually happens within a few hours. So whenever you select publish or set the time for that, it will usually take anywhere within a few hours. Some are quicker than others. Spotify is usually pretty quick. Apple Podcasts is usually a few minutes after that. But yeah, just know that it can take a few hours if they're running a little bit behind on updating their listings. But as long as it's in your RSS feed, you've done everything that you need to.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Last question that has come in is about promoting your podcast on Facebook. Tyler says, what is the first thing to do to begin promoting a podcast to communities on Facebook?
Ask permission to the communities that you're promoting in. Note what their rules and regulations are based on. What are the rules of engagement within the group?
Mhm.
Adhere to those group rules. That is the number one. And in fact, it's probably the only one, because there might be, on She Podcast, there's Windbag Wednesday, and Wednesday is the day you share your episodes within one thread. That's it. There's no other sharing. So if that's one of the cases there, and what you do, or what we do, is we do our very best to cultivate people who are leaving comments in there to just share the most, the hook, the podcasting hook that I wrote, that Brian wrote for our script. Like, that's like the best thing. Like, who doesn't want a nice, enticing hook with a link to wherever you want them to go, whether it's your website, whether you want to build your Apple Podcast audience, whether you want to be your Spotify. So that's kind of how I would go, because I do feel that Facebook groups do, you want to respect the group and what the admins have put in as the rules of engagement.
Yeah, I mean, the same boat there, especially when if you're going outside of Facebook to something like Reddit, which is notoriously stringent when it comes to what you can post as self-promotion, and you technically could be viewed as like, well, you're posting your podcast episode, that's self-promotion. So asking permission from whoever is the admin on that community is definitely important. I mean, I've had some where I've reached out and been like, hey, I do a movie podcast, is it cool if I post my episode? And more often than not, they're just like, well, it's free content, so might as well. But yeah, definitely ask for permission there. Awesome. Are there any other questions that have come in? Any questions at all? Well, I don't know about you. This was a very intensive live.
It was a lot.
Some final thoughts.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I went through a lot.
I hope you guys can reference. I think the final thoughts are, if you want to come back and rewatch and remember bits and pieces, also let us know in the comments and or in the chat how we could do things differently so that it really helps you. We're developing content for next year. We're always here to support you. If there's something specific you want to go deeper into, something that was really helpful, the layout that we did things, is there something better that we can do? There's all kinds of wonderful learning that we can do, building community here to keep you podcasting. And just in case, you don't have and to work or be hosted with Libsyn, remember you can get a 30 days for free if you do the promo code Learn Live, which is available here. You'll probably see it.
There. It's at the
It's
bottom.
a little graphic there. That's right. There it is. Learn Live if you want to do that. And again, we love to serve you so very much. Thank you so much, Brian and Emilio, for going with this today. I know it was like a lot of information, so much time intensive stuff, but we are so very thankful to be able to help you keep podcasting, because your voice matters so much. That is it. And let's say welcome to 2025 here very, very soon.
Yep. Happy holidays, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good one.